You are tired of average. You want more out of life. You know you're capable of something greater. This show will help you become resilient in your home, at work, and in your community. Welcome to the Resilient Humans Podcast with your host, Kevin Wood. Welcome back to the Resilient Humans Podcast. And I have with me a guest who has coached over 1,000 clients in health and nutrition, mentored hundreds of coaches over the last 10 years through precision nutrition and also through her own private coaching practice. She was actually, fun fact, my precision nutrition level 2 coach way back in 2018. Please welcome Kate Solovieva to the show. Is that close?
I mean, you're up there. We'll go with
Solovieva.
Solovieva is much better. I love it.
There you go. All right. I practiced before, so.
Well done. It shows.
Awesome. Kate, I have a very hard-hitting question for you to start us off. The question is, how important are hugs?
Hugs are life. Somebody asked me in a podcast once, what would be a message that I would want to put up on a sign, like, on the highway that everyone in the world would be able to see? And my answer was, hug more people.
Why is that so important? Because I saw a video of you. I know it was about 2015, somewhere around there.
Yes, we're coming up on 10 years. So everyone is invited to join me for a 10-year Free Hugs reunion next year, because I feel like it's overdue, especially post-global pandemic, where I think officially back in the hugging era. Hugs are like free energy exchange. I find that if you hug someone, you can either take or you can give, depending what you need in that moment. Like, there's just something like really magical happens.
So for those that don't know, there's a video on the internet. It was Kate's birthday, and for 2 hours, she was I think it was in Toronto.
Yeah, downtown.
Yeah, and just had a giant sign, big letters, free hugs. You just gave out hugs for your birthday.
My only mistake, Kevin, about that free hugs campaign, I will be honest, was doing it for 2 hours. I could barely walk after. Like, speaking of the energy exchange.
Yeah.
Lessons learned. I think I either need to up my hug endurance, or I think an hour would be a more reasonable goal. So for anyone out there listening, if you're considering, I strongly recommend 1 hour to begin with.
So I'm going to link that video here because there was a moment in that video where you hugged that older gentleman in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
That was powerful, where you said, like, you let go, but he didn't.
Yeah.
Like, that's powerful stuff. So anyway, Kate, for my listeners, I'd love for you to give them a little bit of a background. I know you weren't always in the health and nutrition space, so let us know where you started and then how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, that's a great question. I haven't always been in a health and nutrition space, although I really do feel like I kind of grew up in a health and nutrition space in many ways. So my background academically was in psychology. I started out in computer science of all places. I was really good at math as a kid. Lasted exactly 4 months in that program and switched my degree to psychology, and then became this like annoying person that really loved what she was doing. Like, I was obsessed. I was obsessed with my textbook. I was obsessed with my courses. All the things I was learning, they were just so incredibly fascinating to me. And I don't think I've ever stopped being fascinated by just all things human behavior, like what drives people, why people do what they do. Like, that is such a wonderful, messy thing. And the bonus, of course, is that I am human in all that, which I actually think is a very unique aspect of psychology. Like, if you are a car mechanic, you work with cars all day, every day. You understand cars, you feel cars, but you yourself are not a car. If you are in psychology or if you're in coaching, you are dealing with all these human emotions and behaviors and habits, and you yourself are also a human experiencing all those other things. So when I talk, about our clients, the ultimate secret is that our clients are also us, because our clients are humans and so are we.
It's true. I usually, when I make content, it's I'm not talking to anybody in particular. I'm really just talking to myself.
Totally.
It,
Absolutely. Yes.
so we always screw up. And that's why I say coaches also need coaches. Like it's, you said it, it's very messy and life is hard to navigate. I know right before recording you said, "Sorry, I'm in my living room here and it's a messy background." I was like, "But that's life. Life is messy and that's real. Coaches aren't perfect, nor are we meant to be." And I enjoy showing my clients real life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people really appreciate that, like kind of having a little slice of that behind the curtain transparency.
Cool. The I didn't know that you had the psychology background. That's also one of my minors from university. I took social psychology as one of my teachables.
Oh, I
So
love that. What was your major?
kinesiology and
Okay.
education, and then
Yeah.
I had a minor in psychology. And same thing. I was fascinated with human behavior, and I guess I was lucky because I had really great professors that really dove into the stories behind them. And so
Yeah.
I was always enthralled with like, it's amazing how a group of people would do this. But like you would think to yourself, well, I would never do that.
Right. Until
Well,
put
really?
that situation. But I think the other thing that stands out to me about what you just said, you got lucky with the professors, and even like in the undergraduate and university setting, you're reminding us and highlighting the power of storytelling and how much easier that makes it, like that makes it for us humans to connect with. Like I think that is also a very unique human
Mm,
tendency, is that we love stories. Stories go back thousands and thousands of years. This is our original way of connecting to each other. So I think as personal trainers, as coaches, as teachers, as professors, I think some of the best folks in those fields, they tap into those personal examples, analogies, parallels, storytelling.
I love analogies. They're so useful. I use that a lot in my coaching as well. Do you have any specific analogies that come to mind that you've used in your coaching to help with some of your clients?
Ooh, well, I tend to come up with analogies just on the spot. That's probably one of my superpowers. I know just recently somebody was asking the difference in nutrition coaching between using macros to track their food and using hand portion method that
Mm,
precision nutrition talks about, which is a little bit more beginner friendly. So the analogy I use to explain the difference, it's kind of like using two hammers. Like imagine using one really big, crude, heavy hammer, and that's your hand portions, and then using a smaller hammer that is more precise, right? Like that is actually allows you to hit more accurately where you're hitting. They both are hammers, they both serve the same purpose, but we're not going to expect exactly the same results from both of them. Which one is a better hammer? Well, that's a trick question because they're
it
both hammers,
depends.
different for different tools, right? For different roles, for different jobs.
That's a that's such a to our clients, it seems like a cop out answer, but when they always ask us for what we think, the answer is 9 times out of 10, it depends. How do you navigate that? How do you still instill confidence and some impart some knowledge into your clients when oftentimes the answer is it depends?
The answer is almost always it depends when it includes humans, but I also think it is a bit of a cop-out answer, right? So it can be difficult to get into the nuance on social media, and I always like kind of giggle a little bit when people call each other out for lack of nuance on threads, which is like 150 characters, right? Like which is a definition of no nuance. Like this is not where we're going to have a highly nuanced conversation. But that's where one-on-one coaching can really shine, because this is exactly what we do. Like we take something that depends and we help our people individualize and personalize. And even in an in-person class, like leading people through a CrossFit workout, we were just talking about it. I'm CrossFit level 2 coach. The same exactly same cue is not going to work for two people, right? Like when you might say like, hey, tuck your hips, right? Or just really extend on a lift. And some people might know what that means and some people might not. And that's where your job as a coach, okay, how do I cue the same thing but differently? How can I find something that really resonates with a person? So I know I've used like that expression, give me a little bit of Elvis, right? Like the little bit of a Elvis thrust forward. And for people who know like who Elvis
Yeah.
is, they're like, oh, okay, like they got it, right? Like their hips fly forward, their like butt kind of engages. Meanwhile, if I was maybe cueing 21-year-old, they might not even know who Elvis is. That would not be an appropriate cue.
There are definitely age specific cues when it comes to CrossFit. I've used when teaching the dip and the push press, I
Yep.
say it's the Oompa Loompa drill. And
Ooh,
some of the younger kids, they no idea what an Oompa Loompa is. It just goes right over their head. Yeah.
that's yes.
So all the people that are 40 over, they're like, oh, yeah, like this. And then they do it. So
What I think about also in one-on-one coaching is that this is one of the things that coaching, I do believe, uh, has kind of a bit of an overlap with other professions like doctors, health professionals, therapists, counselors, where one of the main factors of therapy, like of success, is actually rapport between the health professional and the client. So the better rapport we can establish with a client, the better we kind of get along, the more we understand each other. And then as a coach, the more I know about you, the more I understand you, the better coach I can be for you, which is why it's so cool to coach somebody for, 6 months or a year and a half, because you get familiar with their tendency, their patterns. You can connect the dots. It's like, well, remember 3 months ago when you felt similarly, how you tackled that.
how do you use so that has me thinking, how do you use questions to help build rapport with your clients?
Hmm. Well, using questions can be such an incredibly powerful tool. And I think my approach uses like a combination of Socratic questioning, which is an approach to like a line of reasoning, a line of questioning, and also motivational interviewing, which is a therapeutic modality that is like heavily based on open-ended questions. And this is where we really can guide folks to their own reflections and answers through mindful questions. But I also really like the fact that we can control the conversation a little bit. So we often teach that open-ended questions are better than closed-ended questions because they result in more information. So it's not do you feel good or bad, but how are you feeling? Right? Like, so that how are you feeling should probably result in a richer response. But what I really love about that is that we can actually use closed-ended questions as well to our advantage. So I love using closed-ended questions with folks when they're feeling overwhelmed, right? So if it's like, well, I don't know how I'm feeling, it's like, well, are you feeling good? It's a yes or no. And usually people can kind of tap into the simplicity of that. Like my 3-year-old can answer the question of, are you feeling good or bad? Right? Like she can feel that, even though she might not be able to uh, express it in a more complex terms yet.
I love that. And then usually, so I'm part of the precision nutrition level 2 was there was a deep dive into motivational interviewing.
Yep.
And then it's at the end of the conversation, you ask them to repeat or to say
Yes.
in their own words what they kind of went over already. And then you get a clear, it's kind of like a review, but in their words. So to make sure that they understand what everything that you guys just talked about.
Yeah, because I think there's a difference, there's a gap sometimes between what is being
Mm.
said and what is being heard, right? And there is that like reflective listening piece. It's used very often in couples counseling,
Yeah.
actually, right? Like so when one partner says something, and before we move on, the counselor actually asks the other partner to summarize what they heard. And the gaps that can come up are actually quite astounding because the other partner says, well, you said this. And the initial partner is like, no, that's not at all what I said, even though we're both there. So I think just really getting clear for the coach that the client understands maybe what the next steps are or what the takeaways are. I'm blown away sometimes about what the takeaways are for the client. And this is also an interesting one because it may feel like we're putting the work on the client. I know some coaches, after a
Yeah.
coaching call, they would go to really like big length to summarize everything that's been talked about and summarize the takeaways and summarize next action steps for the client. I actually would argue that that's not serving the client super well because you're stealing the opportunity for that reflective work from them. Like you might feel like you're over delivering, but they actually would benefit so much more by doing that reflective work themselves, that I think they're the person to do it.
It's true. And I think one of the lessons that you imparted on me years ago was the clients know themselves better than you will ever know them.
Yeah. Well, we're
Period.
experts, right? Like we show up as experts in nutrition, in CrossFit, in whatever your expertise area is, but the client will always be the expert on themselves. No one else has that many thousands of hours of experience being and living and feeling being themselves.
True. So, good transition. When it comes to nutrition or even physical activity, what do you find are the biggest struggles that clients have in developing good habits, we'll say?
I think the biggest struggle, if we were to just summarize it like to one sentence, and I think this would really entail like probably 80% of people's struggles, is that I know what to do, but I don't know how to do it. Or
Literally written down, right?
right? And even more so, like I know what to do and I just don't do it. And you hear the difference between two things I just said. So, first one, I know what to do, but I don't know how to do it is one. And then I don't like I know what to do, but I just don't do it. They're slightly different. And I think that that second one really lands us in a very much a self-kicking place where people is like, well, I know exactly what I'm supposed to be doing, right? And why? Like we go down the why rabbit hole as well. I know what to do. Why am I not doing it? What? And I sometimes kind of kid and joke with clients. I say, well, if I could wave a magic wand right now and I could tell you exactly why you're not doing what you want to be doing, what would change? You would still need to do the damn thing. Right. So, yes, you now have that understanding, and the understanding is helpful sometimes. Like sometimes people, they thrive from kind of understanding how pieces work and like fit together. But I also know I'm very cognizant of our own human tendency to be stuck in analysis paralysis. We're in this like navel gazing for a year and a half, trying to figure out why are we not doing the thing. Meanwhile, you could have been doing the thing this whole time, while also maybe figuring out why you are resistant to doing the thing, but you're doing the thing.
How do you break that down for them in a practical sense? So I just don't do it. I guess the way I do it is I say, instead of why don't you do it, I ask them, how don't you do it?
Tell
And
me
then
more.
that
What do you mean by that?
it breaks it down more into the why, like, how don't you do it? And then
Mm,
they get into their day of like, it's a process. One of the
right.
PN lessons was called breaking the chain.
Yeah.
An overeating episode has a whole bunch of links in the chain that lead up to that episode. So how don't you do it? Well, if it's a habit that you're trying to break, let's look back in the day. It probably starts earlier, like in the morning. So I had a client yesterday. We talked about her overeating after supper, so closer to bedtime. I was like, well, let's go back. You wake up, tell me what you do. Well, I'm working really hard, at work. It's really stressful. I don't take any breaks. I work through my lunch. I'm like, okay, do you see how that might be part of the issue here? Oh yeah, I used to take like 10-minute like meditation breaks and I don't do that anymore. Hmm. Now we
Okay.
have an action item. So we don't have to worry about the why. This is the how. This is how you're messing it up because you're not doing what you used to be doing and it used to work. So let's go back and try that over again.
I love that. And I sincerely wish more coaches did that. Like that is such a beautiful thing that you just described. And I actually would say I gave an interview recently. We were talking about kind of the most common mistakes that coaches make. And one of the things that I've talked about is that I feel like we as coaches, we very often give up too soon. Like we give up too easily when we're gathering information. Because what you've just described, that's quite the journey that we have to go on in terms of like, okay, no, no, hold on. But like, walk me through your day. What time did you wake up? And then what did you do? And then what did you do after that, right? Like that actually is quite a bit of work that you're describing that you have to do, that the client has to do. It is quite tedious, but it's also key because no one just randomly takes out a chocolate cake out of a fridge at 6 p.m. and eats the whole thing. Like that's just not how it works. Like I'm a very sincere believer that people are smart and amazing and reasonable and actually pretty rational. And no one does a thing for no reason. We usually have very good reasons. Sometimes we don't know what those reasons are. And that's where like rewinding it kind of back to, well, where did it start? So my mentor, Dr. Krista Scott Dixon, used to ask this question, like, why this, why now? Right? It's like, I think I want to lose weight. I want to lose weight by November 15th. Like, I want to lose 10 pounds because I was just looking in my mirror and blah, blah, blah. And we're just kind of going down. It's like, so why this? Why now? And then the other question she would ask is like, so what else is happening for you right now? What else is happening for you right now? 9 times out of 10, when we have that conversation, it's like, well, and my job is really stressful right now. And no, the road on the way to kids' school has been having construction. It takes another 20 minutes out of my day every day. And my husband just lost his job. And it's like, oh, okay. So it's not actually that all of a sudden we need to lose 7 pounds. There is something else. Like, what is the big picture?
That's part of a coach's job is to, I want to say dig. Dig's not the right word, but discover. We'll say discover. That's a better word. Some of the underlying things that are going on. And oftentimes I've seen it where coaches don't want to do that. They don't want to get into the dirt. And that's where you find things. You don't discover a treasure if you don't dig a hole. You got to get your hands dirty and you have to dive in. You have to go in.
Well, and I think what the caveat I'll probably add here, because I'm feeling the tension here too with you, where it's like, is dig the right word or not? Like, do we dig? Like, dig feels very violent. And sometimes
Yeah.
we do have to dig. Sometimes we have to, I don't know, gently uncover. Sometimes we have to meander. But I think the caveat I want to add here is that whatever it is we do this with enthusiastic consent from the client, right? And I think sometimes that's the other like woods that we can get lost in, where we as coaches are so passionate about uncovering the deep why that we're just on this like expedition ready to dig with a shovel. Meanwhile, the client may or may not be ready or willing to do the digging.
Yep.
And that's not up to us to say, no, no, we're going to dig. It's like, but that's not your property to dig on, right? Like it would be very
Correct.
strange. Speaking of analogies, here's one coming out live, right? Just as we're recording, like it would be very strange for us to bring a shovel and just start digging a hole in someone else's property without permission. And I feel like sometimes that's what we do. It's like, but five whys. What do you think the inner motivation is here? It's like, well, are they actually on board to do that deeper exploration? Sometimes people are just there for a workout and they just want to do their workout and go home without addressing the inner deep whys of their behavior.
I've I've two things. One, we have coaches that do that. They really, when they start their classes, they go in and they check in with everybody just to
Mhm.
see where their headspace is so that they
Yeah.
know how to coach them when it comes time to like the clock starts and it's class time, which I absolutely love. The other thing I notice when I'm coaching people one on one, either physically or in a nutrition or a mindset sense, is I notice their breathing patterns. If they're breathing high and tight, chances are they're not willing to open up. And only when they're breathing low and slow, they're more apt to be open and to allow us to dig a little bit deeper. So I've noticed breathing patterns more in the last year or so, and it's changed the coaching experience and the client experience with me as well.
Oh, you're making me miss in-person work so much with that right there, right? I just had a conversation with a therapist who's also a coach, and she was saying that in therapy, there are actually often guidelines and regulations that if you're doing a therapy session over video, the video has to be on and the client has to be visible kind of like from the top of their head to about chest level
Hmm.
just so they can observe like the body language. And I know I have encountered, like I've met some of my clients in real life after sometimes after years of working together, and I'm always struck by how intense, like how much more intense that in person is when we have like all of the information.
It's true. And even over video, you can very quickly identify breathing patterns based on their rate of speech. If
Yes.
they're a machine gun mouth just going a mile a minute, you know that they're literally thinking in overdrive, and it's a matter of like slowing them down. And that's an okay thing to do. Like, whoa, hold on. You're saying a lot. I'm not getting everything here. Do you mind just taking this pen and writing down your thoughts? And automatically that's going to slow them down. You can't write as fast as you think. So it's going to slow the thinking down. Your breathing will, in fact, come down as a result. And then you're more clear. You have more space. You can actually get those on paper.
So one of my favorite tools that I use is kind of utilizing the fact that humans are very much mirroring creatures. Like we are tuned into each other.
Yes.
So when, that was such a great example that you shared just by asking them to write things down. The other thing that I sometimes use, which is completely like unnoticeable to the client, is that I start talking slower
Nice.
like right like very exaggeratedly like just so I really slow down my speech and you can hear your conversation partner is unconsciously pulled to slow down their speech as well because it's unnatural to human interaction where one is really really fast and the other is really really slow. It feels weird. And the same way I would use the opposite when a client shows up and they're feeling very low energy. I would actually speak faster to kind of bring them up with me to speed up to like lend them some of my energy. It's so much fun.
That's so cool. I'd like to shift gears here. I'd like to know what your thoughts are about seasonality. First, I'd like you to describe what it is, and then what we can do with our training or our nutrition throughout our seasons. Because I know it's going to get cold soon, and saying the snow word in September is not very nice. But
I
yeah,
know. I always feel like such a jerk for saying W word in September, W word being winter. It's
it's
been
coming.
It's coming, right? Like, oh, somebody has to say it. I guess it will be me. Um, End of September is like we're recording this end of September, so it's definitely that time. And assuming I know where Kevin is also pretty seasonal. You have clearly determined seasons. And if you are somewhere, if you're based somewhere where seasons are a thing, then seasonality talks about how much you are impacted by the change in the seasons. And I always say that it's not the matter of you being like seasonal or not seasonal, it's the matter of how seasonal you are, how much you're impacted. Some people say, like, I don't really notice the difference between spring, summer, winter, like it's all the same to me, it doesn't matter. I mean, they're impacted, it just doesn't impact their behaviors or their experience of life as much. Meanwhile, you might be the person, or your mom or your partner might be the person they're impacted. Like
Yep.
they drag their feet. Usually, it tends to be kind of that late fall and winter that are like lower energy, lethargic, like feeling sadness, feelings like just feeling blue. For some people, it's much more rare, but it does flip sometimes. So sometimes actually people feel that way more in the spring, summer. Sometimes in a very like hot environments, like in dry Texas. I've worked with some clients that actually are experiencing these like seasonal down symptoms more in the spring and summer when it's so hot that you are pretty much imprisoned indoors all the time because it's just so hot. So yeah, when we talk about seasonality is how much are we impacted by changes in temperature and light?
So light, I remember reading this book years ago called Lights Out, and it talks about the light from the sun and how it changes like not just moods but behaviors as well. And I have a Garmin. I track my steps and everything else, sleep and all that. And over the last, well, quite a few years, I notice in the winter when there's a lot of snow, everything drops down. And then
Yeah.
as the snow starts to melt, things start to come back up. So it's no surprise July and August are my highest step count months out of the entire year. It's more sunlight. And that's people actually go into like a legit hibernation when it comes to winter and they just stop moving. And so it's funny when people say, I'm doing the exact same thing, I'm eating the exact same thing and I'm just gaining all this weight. Well,
Mm.
let's look at your actual activity throughout the entire year. If you have this data, you know that you're actually taking less steps. You're actually being less active during these winter months. Is there something that you can do to counteract that?
Yeah, and I mean, I think what you're observing also, there is some natural fluctuations to this, like that we're kind of built in for. Like it's just the way nature is, it makes it less convenient for us to walk, to get outside, to hike, to run. And when I think of training specifically and like periodizing our movement, our exercise, and our training to seasons. I'm thinking of someone who might keep their training and movement exactly the same, and that might be someone whose training is tied to a gym or a box or a yoga studio. So something that is indoors. So if I'm somebody who loves CrossFit and like my exercise is CrossFit 6 days a week. Well, theoretically speaking, I could just do that year round, right? Like I'm coming to my the same 6 a.m. class. Chances are we're still going to see a little bit of a drop in just general movement around because it is no longer a nice day to just walk to the post office or a grocery store. And now we're going to be driving more, or it gets darker much earlier. But I think some activities, some sports lend a little bit better to just keeping it even keel the entire year. But I think the other question I want to ask here and explore, even if we do have a possibility of keeping it exactly the same, of whether that's a good idea. And I think
Mm.
that's the notion I am so fascinated by because I think if we rewind a couple of thousand of years ago, our lives were much more seasonal naturally. Like if you imagine yourself like living on a farm and you are growing crops and you have a harvest and you are doing things in the spring and doing things in the summer and the fall and the winter, like you can imagine that they're not the same season to season to season. So nature itself would then dictate which of your seasons are more active in having you outdoors. You're planting, then you're watering, then you're weeding, right? Then you're gathering. And then there is this like wrap up and cool down, if you will, in the colder months when we would, for the most part, retreat indoors and we would mend clothes and we would jar jam and we would bake pies and
And
sleep more,
sleep more. Yeah.
right? So I think that there is this like very natural fluctuation that has been there. But if you consider how a lifestyle for a lot of us has evolved, like in modernity, um, we observe this very contrived sameness across the year. No matter the weather, I get up at the same time, my alarm goes off, right?
Mhm.
And the chaos starts. And then I drive to work with the same coffee mug to the same office, and I sit in the same cubicle. And then I go home and I go to my same gym or whatever that might be. And I do that whether it's March or whether it's November. right? And there's that like straight line. And we sometimes struggle, like we've talked about some of the common struggles people have. It's like, oh, I know what to do. I just don't know why I don't do it. Well, motivation also ebbs and flows with the seasons. It is objectively harder and less pleasant to go outside in the colder months. So I actually would argue that our expectation of ourselves to have this linear life is is actually unreasonable. Like I think it is very reasonable to see some ebbs and flows in activity, ebbs and flows in body composition. I actually think like maintaining exactly the same weight and exactly the same body fat year round is
Yeah.
unnecessarily hard, right? And actually just unnecessary overall. It's very common to see just like if we look at periodization in training, there is something called off season when we eat more and strength train more and get stronger and bigger. And then we hit race season or like competition tournament season in early spring. And that's usually where we quite naturally lean out a bit because we're moving more. And it really presents this like more natural fluctuation of both activity, but also in kind of what body looks like and feels like and functions like.
I guess that's where a lot of the frustration comes for people is they're fighting nature.
Right,
That's
exactly.
we have shorter days, you have less sunlight. We I see it every winter. It starts getting darker and the moods just tank. Like
Yeah.
people aren't walking into the gym at 6 a.m. when it's usually sunny. It's pitch black when they start. It's pitch
That's
black when they finish. They're driving home in the dark again.
right.
Like
Yes.
nobody, the moods are just in the pits. Is there anything, any suggestions you have to help with that type of situation?
Well, I think of it as we can either lean into it or we can lean away from it. And either can be fine. And I'll talk a little bit about what I mean by both of those as long as we do that intentionally, because really like I'm really big on intentional decision making, right? Like conscious decision making, observing the actual fluctuations and also identifying patterns because winter is not this unpredictable random occurrence. Like
Where'd all this snow come from?
and we often act that way because again, if we don't like winter, and I don't, I've been suffering from seasonal affective disorder for 10 plus years. Like, trust me, I do not like winter. But if we are in this kind of avoidance mode, then by the time we are ready to quote unquote deal with it, it's too late because it's December. So this is why I'm talking about preventative measures and winterizing plans in September, because now's the time. If your energy dips and your mood dips in the winter, well, you're going to have even less energy and even worse mood to try and kind of pull yourself out. So I talk about like planning for the colder months while it's still nice out, while you have that energy. So in terms of like leaning into the seasons, would be somebody who's, for example, a road runner and who runs on road, spring, summer, early fall, beautiful weather to run. Um, in terms of leaning into the seasons, we could talk about switching the sport to something that is winter appropriate. And a lot of like runners will switch to cross country skiing or skating or snowshoeing. So we're kind of leaning into the climate. We're just kind of going with it. Like, well, it's snowing. So instead of like muscling the running, which is fine. Some folks do run year round. They're very proud of it. I'd argue there is that artificial contrived linearity that is expected because running is not as effective or as pleasurable or as safe in the winter, at least
Mhm.
where I live. So you absolutely can do it. But in terms of periodizing the movement, this is where we can either switch it to an actual winter sport where you're still outdoors, or you can lean away from the change and switch to something that is indoors. It's like I'm outdoors 2 or 3 seasons out of the year, but then in the winter, I switch to an intentional strength program. I do hot yoga, I do Pilates. I mean, if anyone has ever done hot yoga, it's incredibly pleasant in December. and it's incredibly unpleasant in July. So there is this
Right.
like very, very natural like pull, right? Like just like drinking a cold, refreshing smoothie is lovely in July and not so lovely in November.
Accurate. That's awesome. I love that. Is there anything nutritionally that people can do to plan ahead or to lean into this as the darker months come up for us?
So nutritionally, what we see with like these seasonal fluctuations is that people start craving more carbohydrates. Like that tends to be pretty common. And it goes hand in hand with a number of things. Like we're sleeping more, we're feeling more lethargic, we're feeling more tired, less motivated, and we're craving more carbohydrates. So, one way, again, to kind of lean in would be to plan for the carbohydrates that we want to consume. Like there is a reason why when we look at the traditional late fall, winter cuisines, like you see heavier, heartier root vegetables, like carby comfort foods. So we can absolutely just kind of lean into those. And there might be a handful of recipes that you pull out when it gets cold. I talk to clients often about having a bit of like a seasonal celebration where we have certain things that we love, that are pleasant, that we look forward to, that only make sense or are appropriate in the colder months. So it might be something as simple like there is that signal to the season switchover when Starbucks rolls out their Christmas cups, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
This is like I've started getting one peppermint mocha. As soon as that comes out, I get a peppermint mocha. It's kind of funny. I don't even like it that much. I have it once a year and I'm like, yeah, it's just like I remember it. It's perfectly mediocre, but it just like acts as a little bit of a changeover for me. And maybe there is like that chili, like that pumpkin soup, that stuffing that you really like, and that is like your maybe your fall menu. Like think of farm to table restaurants, they would very much switch over their menu and you would see the seasons reflected on their
Yep.
menu. You will see potatoes and pumpkins and squash. You probably are not going to see asparagus. It'd be weird. And I'm really making the connection often to like Ayurveda. My initial movement practice many years ago was yoga, and I taught yoga for years. I studied yoga in India. So Ayurveda is this like ancient healing practice that talks about balancing the mind and the body. And they talk about eating with the seasons in order to balance the energy in the body with the energy kind of out in the elements.
Hmm.
So they're talking about adjusting your foods to richer and oilier and heavier in the colder months, right? To like kind of keep warm and then switching it to like crisper and more bitter in the spring. Like think bitter in the spring, like the fresh greens that we get, like the first crop of the fresh vegetables. And it's so fascinating to me because, of course, Ayurveda is more of like a philosophical practice. There isn't necessarily like scientific evidence to suggest that this is what we should be doing. But very coincidentally, the directives from Ayurveda, they align quite beautifully with eating seasonally. Like it's that notion of leaning in once again, right? Like living in Ontario, I can absolutely eat tomatoes year round. It is a luxury and a privilege. The fact that we are in fact able to do that. I can go to my grocery store in February and I can purchase tomatoes. My husband may or may not let me into the door because those tomatoes taste like cardboard.
Yeah.
Right? They just don't taste the same. Right. So kind of leaning into the changes and like what is actually uh, both appealing, but also kind of nutritionally full, right? Like think of the squash versus asparagus, which is at that point coming probably from Florida or elsewhere, right? Like, so you're not going to get that freshness, that like satisfying crunch, and also like crunchiness of asparagus in the late fall, just like that smoothie.
There's also, this is a side note, but financially, eating with the seasons is also beneficial because if you're at the farmer's market, it's local. It's coming from the farm down the street to the market to your fridge or your house. So generally, financially, it's much more cost effective to eat seasonally than to get, $15 strawberries that
I
came
was
from
just gonna
halfway
say
around the world.
strawberries is a good example for where we are, absolutely, because yes, you can
Yeah.
buy them. But
Yeah.
it hurts. My kids can destroy one container of those strawberries in one breakfast.
Yeah. They're disappearing. We had just down the street from us on the main road, there's a truck, and they have the list posted on this giant sandwich board, and strawberries has been crossed out for the last few weeks. And
Yeah,
that's when I knew winter is coming, when the
that's right.
strawberry sign was crossed out. So, um, can you give me a little bit more about, are there any supplements that our listeners could tap into to help them with this seasonality?
Ooh, well, there are going to be if you are the person that knows that you're dragging in the winter, chances are you've already been down this road. Like chances are you've looked at the grocery store aisle or Whole Foods aisle with supplements promising higher energy and vitamin D, right? And anyone that has ever heard you say that you're struggling with winter has immediately said, "Have you tried
Told
vitamin?"
you. Yeah.
Right? Like, and you kind of want to slap them a little bit because, of course, you have tried vitamin D because that's the one damn thing that everyone tells you to do. So there will be supplements that will be kind of objectively helpful based on research. I think the tricky thing with supplements is the following. As a health coach, I am absolutely terrified every single day knowing that any one person can walk into a supplement store and buy a bunch of supplements and just take them. That terrifies me to no end because we don't know what those things are. We don't know how they interact with each other. We don't know how they interact with the medications or supplements you are already taking. So that tends to be such a dangerous game of self-healing. And I understand it. Trust me, I do, because I also know what it's like to just be desperate to feel better. But in terms of supplements, I really help clients come up with a winter specific, but also they specific stack. I would recommend whey protein powder and creatine all day, every day, year round, right? Because whey protein, supplement, sure, but also kind of food, right? Like so, and creatine because research. So that's something that is just going to be there. It's your year round stack. But in terms of feel better in the winter, I think my number one recommendations of where to start would be to kind of start at zero, at absolutely no supplements at all, and then talk to your health provider about doing blood work. Vitamin D would be the one supplement that would actually truly make a difference. But I think the trick with vitamin D is that most of us are taking it blindly. We actually don't know. Like we're taking some, right? And that's not really a very specific dose. Some is not a very specific dose. We don't know if you're low, super low, or normal. And if you're following the guidelines on a bottle, 400 units is going to be the recommended dosage. I started doing vitamin D supplementations based on blood work last year. My dose was 50,000 delivered in an injection to bring my levels up. So that's 50,000, not 400. Right. So it's sort of sometimes with vitamin D, it becomes the issue of we're taking a teaspoon when we need a gallon. And that is definitely don't want this to kind of sound like everyone needs 50,000 units of vitamin D. Absolutely not. But my point there being is that supplements should be taken based on your specific need to supplement a thing. And
Correct.
my partner, for example, he works outdoors. So he works outside 10, 11 hours a day through spring, summer, and fall. I work indoors and I sit on my butt in front of a computer. Our vitamin D levels are probably going to be very different coming into the fall and winter. So the universal suggestions of just take 1,000 units or 2,000 units are just not helpful enough. Kind of like everyone should drink 2 liters of water is also not super helpful, right? Because it's always little. It's like, okay, well, you can be 6 feet, you can be for 410, you could be working indoors, outside, no matter, and everyone needs 2 liters of water magically. That's not the case. We know that's not the case.
Absolutely makes sense. And the same as, we don't prescribe everybody the exact same exercise dose. Everybody
That's right.
has their own flavors, their own goals, needs, whatever it is. Even with whey protein, we don't say, you need to have 5 scoops a day. That's a blanket statement. That's kind of dangerous. You shouldn't tell that to everybody. So
That's right.
depends on their body size, their goals, what they're aiming for, and that's what you would give them as a suggestion. So
Well, and you also notice that like oftentimes this is I always kind of listen for that in folks and their expertise is that when I'm asking my coach, my nutrition coach about supplementation, they should really be sending me to somebody who has expertise in supplementation. Because if you heard what was my recommendation, you should probably be taking vitamin D. That is absolutely my recommendation to most people listening to this podcast. You probably should be taking vitamin D. How much? I have no idea. You should find out.
yep.
Right? You should find out and take that much. And that actually can make a huge difference because I've definitely found that through both clients' experience and my own is that when you actually can titrate the dose to what you need, then you actually feel it. And it's like, whoa, well, that's a big difference.
And this goes way back. There was a post, maybe it was one of the lessons from maybe the level one, but mowing the lawn when your house is on fire.
Yes.
Love that analogy. When I post about it, it always gets a lot of traction.
Mhm.
But it's so true. And, people are either consuming copious amounts of alcohol and eating out and, supplementing with caffeine and also asking about, hey, what supplements can I take to boost my energy? Okay,
Yeah.
listen, here we have more bigger, grander issues to deal with than plopping more things into your life. Let's let's put out the main fire first, then we can chat. So before we continue, that's what I want people to know is like check to see your main structure to make sure that it's not burning down before you start fiddling with the other stuff.
So one of the things I really focus on when I talk to folks about seasonality and kind of managing energy and mood is noticing where the downward spiral begins. And it's usually somewhere in September or October. Like as soon as we start noticing the light going down, there's going to be something happening. It's going to be, oh, there's that little thing. I used to walk my kids to their swimming lesson because it's 10 minutes down the road and now I am driving them, right? There's going to be, oh, there's an invite that came out to a birthday party. I don't know. It's cold. It's dark. I
Mhm.
don't feel like it. I said no. So there's going to be these tiny, tiny, like I kind of call them, it's like a domino effect.
Yep.
They start falling, and we usually have just enough juice to carry us through like the Halloween and the Thanksgiving and the Christmas, right? And then by the time January hits, we kind of wake up and we go, whoa, where I just have no energy. I don't want to go out. I don't want to do anything. And the tricky part is, I now don't have any energy to make any changes to make myself feel better. Like I am now at the bottom of the winter downward spiral, not at the top. So
Right.
that's really kind of where it's like September, we are all at the top of the winter downward spiral. So what is it? Oh, I'm running less. Oh, okay. What am I going to replace it with? Am I going to consider skiing this year? Am I going to join my CrossFit gym for the winter? Like, what am I going to do? What are those little tiny, like yellow warning light signals?
Don't wait till all your dominoes have fallen because then you will be overwhelmed with picking them all back up.
Then they're all down. Yeah.
Yeah. Kate, this has been a great conversation. And I always ask my guests the same question to finish us off. Could you please describe what resiliency means in your own words?
Oof, resiliency. I absolutely love that word. To me, resiliency means adaptability and versatility, being harder to kill, being flexible, being able to thrive in any situation, being able to figure out how to eat on the road or on the weekend, or out at a restaurant, how to move my body, whether or not it's winter or summer, whether or not I have a sprained ankle or whether or not I have a headache. It's that like ability to just tuck and roll.
Love that. I've asked everybody and they all give me different answers, and I learn and adapt my own definition as a result of hearing what others say. Is there, I know you've said a lot of tidbits and advice throughout this. For our listeners, is there one piece of practical advice that you could give them to help them become more resilient so they can finish listening to this and then turn around and go do this thing to help them become more resilient?
Hmm. So I would say that to be more resilient, you have to expand your toolbox, which is not super specific, but I can apply this and I encourage you to apply this to anything and everything. How do you expand your toolbox? If your go-to exercise is running, what else can you add? How can
Mm.
you exercise if you do have a sprained ankle? If your to-go exercise is CrossFit, fantastic. What do you do when the gym is closed? Right? Like, so it's really that. I always have this thing for breakfast, always. That's my go-to. Great. What other options do you have? So it's really kind of figuring out like what is my go-to? What do I come to depend on? And then pushing yourself outside of the comfort zone a little bit, like, ooh, like, but what else? And that comes a lot of times up when we talk about like coping mechanisms and strategies, like, oh, well, I'm tired, so I watch Netflix. So I'm tired and I eat chocolate cake. All of those are completely legitimate coping mechanisms. It's, and what else? How
Yeah.
do we build the toolbox? If I only have one go-to coping mechanism, that's the only one I have, and that's the one I will always, always go to. How do I add to my menu of options?
Love that. It's almost like having a plan B for whatever it is. It's why our cars have a spare tire in the back. You
That's
have
right.
your four main tires, they'll get me to where I need to go until one doesn't. And then you have that backup plan. So I love that.
What is your plan A, plan B, plan C, and plan D? Right? Like, so, and what if that doesn't work? And then, and
And
what
then
about us, right? So, and that really, I think lends such an expansive feeling because it really allows you to feel very grounded in, well, no matter what comes up, I will figure it out.
this reminds me of the client from yesterday. We were talking about in the evenings, there's often a lot of overthinking. There's a
Mm,
lot of activity through the mind. Everything's busy during the day. At night, the mind keeps racing. And so she just wants to stop, like not think. And oftentimes that results in laying down on the couch, watching Netflix, and binge eating along the way. So I said, okay, let's brainstorm then. Let's come up with another list of other ways that you can underthink.
exactly.
So we just started writing things, or she started writing things down. I could read, I could go for a walk, I could sit on my back deck and breathe. We just bam, 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 listed all of these things out. And I said, you're building a toolbox now.
Yes.
You have a toolbox that you can dive into and pull out any of those tools whenever you feel that urge to underthink.
Yeah, so consider expanding the toolbox when it comes to stress management, nutrition, movement, health, all the things. That's
Love it.
resilience.
Awesome. Kate, if our listeners want to get a hold of you or find you on the socials, where would they do that?
Probably Instagram is the best place to find me. So it's at K underscore my last name, Solovieva. I know Kevin will probably link that
I'll
up to
throw that in. Yes.
spare y'all the need to spell it out, or mylastname.com is my website as well.
Awesome. Kate, it's been awesome having you on the show. Thank you so much for taking the time, speaking to our listeners, and I hope you have a fantastic day.
You too. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with others or leave a rating and review. To catch all the latest episodes, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.